you kind of need a C3 physician, curious, courageous, and connected. So you need a physician, like a functional medicine doctor on your team, if you want to do this all above board, sanctioned, and responsibly, right?
Sure.
Someone who, a physician who is familiar with psychedelic therapies, who has access to a compounding pharmacy and is willing to partner with a patient in service of their long-term health and development. So if you have those things, then yeah, absolutely. No, but I mean, like as far as like a simple out-of-the-box death rebirth experience, that's quite there. I think that if you really wanted to just say, and this is not advocacy, and everybody's on your own recognizance to do everything that is morally, legally, ethically, and professionally aligned with you and where you live, would be you actually combine hyperventilatory breathwork with, and this is all with sequenced music.
Sure.
Right. Blindfolds, couch, recumbent space, no mobility, all that kind of stuff. And actually one of the study subjects did this as a couple, and they actually did the carbogen with music, and they scheduled dark, scary music for the beginning during the dark, scary time of like the suffocation, transitioning into nitrous oxide and oxygen, and ramping into celestial release music.
Sign me up.
With erotic sexual stimulation. At the same time,
double sign me up,
and reported that and the reason it works is because you're stressing the nervous system, and then so tension release, right, which is naturally intuitively satisfying to us, and then what we haven't unpacked, which is what is the impact of nitric and nitrous oxide, so the nitrogen family. And nitric oxide is an internal neurotransmitter. Herb Benson at Harvard did tons of work on this, but he called it the bliss molecule because it's what takes us out of stress responses into bliss responses, into deeply pleasant flow states. And
also involved in erections and erectile tissue in the clitoris or the penis.
Exactly, which is why Viagra works. It actually boosts nitric oxide. There's a company here, Neo 40 in Austin, that also does concentrated lozenges. You can indulge.
On it makes a supplement total nitric oxide.
Oh, sweet. Right? There you go.
Yep.
So basically, the spectrum is dietary to supplement to ED drugs on the nitric oxide spectrum, right? But nitrous oxide, which is one molecule different, researchers at MIT, anesthesiologists there, did a study in 2015 where they actually found that for 3 to 12 minutes after ingestion of 50-50 nitroxygen, right, that gas blend, that patients were going into double amplitude delta brainwaves.
And this is laughing gas for what people know. This is what you get at the dentist. This is, and that was, so that's an experience that maybe some of us have. It's also what recreationally people will do. They'll call them whippets.
Yes, but I think my experience is that nobody's doing them right.
And I definitely want to get into that. So I had a experience with the C3 doctor who had good, like professional grade nitrous oxide, which is also that is nitroxide, right? Or
Well, that would just be my assumption would be is you had a tank of pure nitrous oxide
and
where you would get a splitter and you would blend it with oxygen to do the 70-30 or 50-50 blends, which would be the medical protocols.
Okay, so it was in the medical protocols. We would get a balloon, have music, and he would guide us through this experience, and fuck, it was profound. And it was the closest thing I've experienced to the 5-MeO unicity. It didn't have the same fabric, color. There was something missing in the heart. It wasn't the same. I'm not saying it was the same, but it was a unicity space. It was a space of capital O oneness space that I was entering, and intensely pleasurable in that experience at that kind of rapid. And we're not talking about like trickling it through, and then when I was reading what you're talking about, which you're about to share about what's actually happening with the brainwave state, I was like, whoa, really fucking interesting.
Super interesting. And so that was one of my first kind of like breadcrumbs. I was like, oh, wait. So for 3 to 12 minutes, after which your body and brain adapt and normalize, you're in delta wave brainwaves, which is the lowest, right? Now we're getting into the physiological protocols of the death rebirth initiatory practice, right? Which is basically you go down to like 1 to 4 hertz. So most of us are up in beta waves. We're talking, you're listening to us right now. We're all in beta waves. If we chilled out and did a little breath work or a little contemplation, we might drop a little lower into alpha, and we want to get super, super chill and almost nodding off, falling asleep, we'd be down into theta. Delta is all the way below that. And the only other time we experience delta waves is in deep and dreamless sleep. And so delta waves show up almost nowhere on the map. They're like the redheaded stepchild of EEG research, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because sleep researchers are interested in REM, where we dream. Consciousness researchers are interested in beta, alpha to theta, mostly, with the occasional kind of curiosity about what happens in gamma. And delta, virtually no one's studying. So this MIT paper was fascinating and unique, and they were shocked. They're like, oh my God, nitrous oxide bonds with the central nervous system in a way that no other molecule we're aware of does. And it's double amplitude delta wave states. And what got really interesting is that Carl Diceroth at Stanford has just done a paper. I think it came out in Nature last year, probably maybe fall of last year. And he had done studies with ketamine and optogenetics, where they actually literally change some of the genes from mice and activate them with light, right? But he was also using human patients who had, what did they have? Epilepsy, I think. So they were basically able to consciously report back what their interior experiences were, and found that both the mice and the human subjects, when given ketamine, had a dissociative state experience.
Sure.
Corroborated by, no surprises, but also corroborated by the subjective patient's reports. They then measured what was going on, and they said, 3 hertz brain activity. So in that band of delta. Then they went back and optogenetically stimulated the mice and neuroelectrically stimulated the humans to put them back into 3 hertz without the ketamine. They had the same dissociative out-of-body experiences, and those dissociative experiences had the same positive effect on depression and other mental and emotional sadness or disorder. So you're like, okay, so now we've got MIT and nitrous oxide, we've got Stanford and ketamine and delta wave states. We've got all these signs pointing to, hey, it's not the way you get there. It's the there that matters. However, whichever buttons, mechanisms of action or catalyst we use, delta wave, waking delta is potentially the mother load. It is, and the same thing, actually, I saw a radar plot of a recent study on 5-MeO, and the entire brain cross-hemispherically during the full induction of a 5-MeO experience is just lit up with delta, the entire brain. So you're like, okay.
It's almost like that's the ohm. That's the ohm of creation. Yes. That's the creation sound.
That is the sweet spot. And to bring the metaphorical, because we've been talking about death, rebirth practices as if there's, sort of in the religious realm and the spiritual realm. This is very specific, right? This is resetting your nervous system almost to the point of EEG flatline, but you're awake and perceiving. And what information do you get access to? And so you're simultaneously discharging your nervous system. It's what a colleague of ours, Ryan Darcy, who's Canada's top traumatic brain injury neuroscientist, and they've been doing studies with an electric device, the POMS device that you put on your tongue, and it stimulates the cranial nerve. So it goes straight into your brainstem, right, via electrical stimulation via the tongue. So like Halo headsets and all the other gadgety headsets that people say do all this rad shit, most of them don't, because they're too low voltage. Otherwise, they wouldn't be consumer accessible. They'd only be physician administered. And then our skulls are really thick. So you basically just it's like a shower head on the top of the roof of a car versus going straight through your tongue to your cranial nerves and your brainstem. And he experienced the same thing. They were using it for traumatic brain injuries. They were using it for cerebral palsy and all sorts of motor function stuff. And then they actually were like, hey, how do we use this for optimizing? And they said, even if you're targeting just one of the 10 cranial nerves, you get a global system reboot. So it's pretty much like your laptop when it starts glitching, right? Because it's been open for a week and you've got 50 browser tabs open. And then you're like, oh, I don't get video on my Zoom anymore. What happened, right? And you just like, boop, boop, to turn it off, power it back on, come back into equilibrium. And that's what all of these experiences do. So you're like, okay, you have breath work, you can have orgasm, you can have pain, you can have nitrous and nitric oxide combinations, you could have ketamine, you could have 5-MeO DMT, you could have the cranial nerve stim. You take your pick. It's not and so if anybody has an issue with or gets tripped up on the sensationalism of any of the methodologies, you're like, that's not the point. The point is that all of these are just signposting the road to Rome. Right. And the road to Rome is the road home. Because it's like, oh, I actually get to live a death, rebirth, systemic reboot of my nervous system. I get to discharge all of that static, all of that micro PTSD, and maybe even some macro PTSD. And oh, by the way, you're conscious and it's not information free. It's actually profoundly rich territory. Most folks are familiar that William James, the entire reason we have the field of comparative religion is because William James dabbled in nitrous oxide in the 1890s, but most folks don't know Winston Churchill did too. And he said, depth upon depth of almost alien intelligence reveals itself. He goes, and then slips through your fingers. He goes, therefore I have come to conclude that nitrous oxide, it just swaps physical pain for intellectual pain, right? That it slips through his fingers.
And I get what he's saying, because obviously my experience with nitrous oxide is limited, but my experience with ketamine is more extensive. And in the depth of those journeys, there's been so many times where I was like, I got it. I fucking got it. This is it.
This is it.
I've figured it all out. And then I'll pop out and I'll be like, Vi, you'll never believe.
All the
Wait,
things.
what? I figured it out, but now I don't have it. And there was even one time where I was like, I'm going into this. I'm going to remember.
Yep.
And I would go in and I would get it. And I would like, I'm remembering this. And I'd forget it. And be like, oh my God, I can't believe I forgot it. It's something about the brain just doesn't store memory when it's in that delta frequency.
Well, it's the transition. And that's why both William James and Churchill complained. They're like it's a James said it's like staring at an alpenglow peak, with the sunset on the snow and then the sun dipping away, and then it just, the glowing ember just turns to cinders. And that is exactly what MIT researchers found. They said that 3 to 12 minutes is what you got. And then it switches off and the body adapts and normalizes. And so if you suddenly go from delta and you punt back up into beta, you're like, oh, whoa, here I am. What happened? What was that? Right? You no longer have access to the file storage, right? So you have to get conversant in holding the information. And this is, this gets to the practitioner part, right? When we're only talking about respiration, but it's the foundational piece right now. But once people realize, oh my gosh, I can gain access to like the galactic wishing well, I'm going to go there all the time, right? And it's the meaning of life and existence. Then it goes from, is it possible, to is it skillful or helpful?
Right.
And really the only difference between, because once you start pushing all these evolutionary drivers, they're very powerful, and you do them all at once together, they become overwhelmingly so. And if you've never had if you've wrestled with addictions or compulsions in your life, be profoundly warned that this is the road to ruin. And if you haven't, if you're like a super straight down the middle, straight edge who's never had any issues with self-will, will or control, you still may get hijacked, because you're pushing every single one of the tumblers in the combination lock, right, to a lizard brain fuck monkey, right?
Yeah.
Right? And so really the only difference between an alchemist, someone who is doing this for the process of integration and development, and an addict is the scoreboard, right? Are you bringing it back home?
Yeah.
Or are you getting cross-eyed in the pretty lights?
And so there's a couple things that I want to touch on. One, we have said that it's not how you get there, but it's where you're going. However, every different one of these things that we mentioned have different qualitative experiences and can also reach you to different states. Like some blast you so far beyond the point where you need to access for trauma release that you might not get the trauma release.
Yep.
And I think 5-MeO is potentially one of those categories, even maybe nitrous oxide. It's like you're all going all the way to the end point when there's value at the end point, but maybe one of these other tools, breath work or one of these other things is going to get you right to that sweet spot where you start shaking carbogen, something like that, versus, nitrous oxide. So there are different things that working the full spectrum of here to there are valuable, and which bridge you choose and what are the costs, what's the cost benefit analysis of the bridge, which is something I think we should cover quickly. Like, it seems that of these different methods, obviously breathwork only has accretive value for the most part, right?
Yep.
Like when you're hyperoxygenating. There's a lot of stigma about the damage done by using nitrous oxide, but I haven't found any research to actually show that it is damaging. It's killing brain cells. This is the idea, right?
Yeah. I mean, funnily enough, any form of static apnea isn't without its downsides. There was a study, I think 2 years ago, on maybe the top 10 champion freedivers, and 8 of them had clinical impairment. So when I was learning with Kurt Crack, he's like, oh, I killed more brain cells in college drinking beer. He was very all shucksy about it. And then I read that subsequent study, and they literally had clinical levels of cognitive impairment from all that time doing breath holds and hypoxia.
Well, that's actually creating the deficiency of oxygen
Yeah.
in a
So even intensive extreme breath work, and this is obviously free divers going down 100
right.
feet and that kind of thing, but like it not great to have a brain without healthy oxygen, right?
Yeah.
On the nitrous oxide, there's actually, I think, 2 levels. The typical stuff you'll read, like if you read, like Google something and nitrous oxide safety pops up, it'll be like dance safe or something like that. And it'll be talking about, recreational abuse. And the obvious stuff is cold gas into your lungs, so don't inhale from tanks, and passing out and falling over and hitting your head, so like kind of mechanical stuff, which is very easy to mitigate. And you're like, okay, so that's not a big deal. Then, inhaling a pure gas like that versus a gas blend versus a nitroxygen increases the likelihood of hypoxia. I think the subtler but meaningful one is B12 deficiency, depletion, and then potential impact myelination on nerve sheaths. And that can happen with chronic use. And it's weird because you might be like, oh, B12, I'll just take my B12 tablets. It doesn't work that way. You can't exogenously supplement. In a way I don't fully understand the mechanism. I'd have to go back and reread the papers.
Maybe like the way that the cells hold it. Or
yeah, you can't just pop your B12 and be good. and it's non-reversible. So and when that happens, you get high homocysteine levels and you get impact on myelination. So chronic use not recommended.
Right.
But what we would say is that, on the other hand, it's a WHO essential medicine. It's used by doulas, for women, for mothers giving birth. It's used for kids in dentist office, those kind of things. It's actually inordinately safe in that capacity, but not in the realm of abuse. So the simplest is to say, particularly because of that, I just saw the meaning to life and it just slipped through my fingers, right? The question, you have to put boundaries on use.
Right.
So once a year, once a quarter, once or whatever, and then do it once. Do one breath hold protocol and remember it. And if you didn't remember it, well, nice try. Come back next time, right? Versus, right? We were talking about this earlier, right? But the Wall Street Journal just published a slightly deeper investigative piece on Tony Hsieh's passing, right? The CEO of Zappos. And he had gone down the roads of dissociatives with ketamine and nitrous oxide and had become convinced that he was accessing the secrets of the universe and the source code for saving humanity. And he was a very smart, very successful guy who had moved a lot of matter around in the world. Yeah. So he had a belief that, in fact, it was his to do, right? And how to balance that. In fact, our buddy Eric Davis, you probably have come across his stuff. He's a fascinating.
His podcast coming out this week.
Oh, sweet.
Well, not for the people who are listening in reality live right now.
Yeah.
It'll already be out for those of you listening. Check it out.
Yeah. But he said, in this instance, he was talking about ketamine, but he's like, hey, ketamine's got the story of like, hey, psst, here's the secrets to the universe. That's not all of it. You got to come back for the rest. And you've got a super important part to play, right?
Ooh, that's the slipperiest slope of all.
Right?
That's that point where you slip into mania, where I am different than
the
and
anointed.
Special because.
Yes.
Whenever you see that, I cannot stress this enough. You start to see that, and I've seen it. And sometimes the instinct, you'll see it in a friend group, you'll see that thing, and where someone has this special importance and they're doing special work or something. I've stayed silent in those situations where I'm just like, that's a little sketchy, but I don't want to impose myself. I don't know them that well. It hasn't been in the intimate circle. But I would urge that if you see it, offer the clear reflection, because it's so dangerous. It's such a dangerous, slippery slope when someone starts to get in that state.
Yeah. It's happening down in Costa, Santa Teresa. There's some breathworking ketamine tribe down there doing their things.
And I'm sure they believe they're going to save the world themselves because they have some special importance.
Yes, and it's more like
sketchy.
Just like tattoo that shit on your forehead, stick it to, fridge magnets. Like, don't forget, like that is the tricksy nature. It's a known issue.
Right.
None of us are special, cupcake.
Yes,
right.
It should be on a cupcake. Can you make those for the
You're not special.
Yeah, and just have a cupcake magnet you can put on a fridge.
Exactly. So those are the known issues, right? That's why this entire body of knowledge and practice has been so closely guarded, so secretive, and so marginalized for thousands of years, as it's volatile as all get out.
And then let's also put this in perspective. You know what? So are opiates. So is OxyContin. Like so are benzos. Like look at what Jordan Peterson's had to go through because he was prescribed some benzos to calm his nervous system down, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of gnarly shit out there. And we just are like, yeah, it's medicine. Fucking Tylenol kills like 900 people a year because of liver toxicity. You know, there's a lot of downfalls. So yes, be very mindful. And especially as we're in this opening, like, don't fuck it up for yourself and don't fuck it up for everybody, because all it's going to take is a couple of these and then people are going to run with it, because there is a inherent energy which wants to suppress this knowledge. And because it's terrifying to the ego, because it's threatening to the ego. It can destroy the identification structure that people are in, so they want to suppress it. I don't think it's a conspiracy. I think it's just base level fear, ego based fear. Oh shit, that thing might destroy me. Let's eradicate it. And so be careful for yourself and be careful for all of us. Please. Fucking please.
Yeah. Like hashtag don't do stupid shit, right?
Yeah.
Like don't end up in a cult, a body bag, a jail cell, a loony bin, rehab, divorce court, right? Don't, because you fuck it up for everybody else.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt.